Comics.
We like
Comics.
because they have no balls.
Bow ties are cool, and I'm Joe Getcho.
And I'm Mike White, and this is the podcast We Like Comics because they have no bones. Find us on social media at Boneless Comics Podcast or on X at Boneless Comics 1. That's right.
That's right, we are a clean comic book podcast where we chat about comics from Marvel, DC, IDW, Dark Horse, Image, and more. Find extra content on bonelesscomicspodcast.com and look for our after shows and bonus content on our YouTube channel at Boneless Comics Podcast. And don't forget to hit subscribe and click the notification bell to get updates. But for now, let's get into our review of Doctor Who, Empire of the Wolf, written by Jody Houser and art by Roberta Ingranata, published in 2022 by Titan Comics.
The Wolf. Bad Wolf. So for our characters today, if you want like detailed background information, you can actually go to our explanation of different incarnations of the Doctor, which was in our episode last year when we reviewed Doctor Who and the Weeping Angels of Mons. I think there's some info in the episode, and then there is like a deep dive after show that we did as well, where Joe really explains like all of the history and stuff. So if you really want to get into that, there's a place for it already, but we're not going to spend a lot of time on that here. So bottom line, the Doctor is a centuries-old alien Time Lord from the planet Gallifrey who travels in time and space in his ship called the TARDIS, Time and Relative Dimension in Space, frequently with his companions. And at the end of life, or at the end of his lives, I guess I should say, the Doctor regenerates, and as a result, his physical appearance and personality change. So today, our story features the following characters. So first of all, we have the Eighth Doctor. He was played on screen by Paul McGann, and he was preceded in regeneration by the Seventh Doctor, played on screen by Sylvester McCoy, and was followed by the War Doctor, who was played by John Hurt. And I don't think we saw John Hurt until like way later in like a movie, but they kind of talked about him and he was mentioned. So yeah. And the Ninth Doctor, who was played on screen by Christopher Eccleston, Eccleston is actually where sort of the modern era of Doctor Who begins. So the Eighth Doctor is an adventurous, romantic version that isn't above giving people glimpses of their futures. So that's something that kind of sets him apart from some of the other ones. He isn't really as concerned about like paradoxes and stuff like that. And he's like, no, what can you tell me about my future? Like, I would love to know and all this stuff. And it's like the other ones would maybe be a little more sensitive about stuff like that, but he doesn't seem to care. He's also fairly cheerful and optimistic until the beginning of the Time War, which actually takes place after this story, and which the Eighth Doctor was heavily involved in. So in this story, he has no knowledge of the Time War because, again, in his timeline, it's before that. So that's important to know for some character interactions later on. Mm-hmm. We also have the 11th Doctor, played on screen by Matt Smith. That's my personal favorite. He is the final incarnation of the Doctor's original regenerative cycle, and he was preceded in regeneration by the 10th Doctor, played on screen by David Tennant, and was followed by the 12th Doctor, played on screen by Peter Capaldi. So if you've seen the Suicide Squad, James Gunn's movie, Peter Capaldi also plays the Thinker in that movie. So that's another place you may have seen him pop up in kind of nerd culture. So the 11th Doctor is a bit of a hipster, preferring to wear a fez because fezzes are cool, and covering up his insecurities and regrets with kind of a flippant attitude. Always up for a mystery, his lighthearted attitude isn't to be mistaken for weakness. So this Doctor especially is kind of at a point where he's kind of seen a lot, he's experienced a lot of loss, and he's not really wanting to get too involved with people and stuff like that. And so, but instead of seeming really detached, he just makes jokes and is really goofy all the time. That's kind of to cover up that he like doesn't really want to get close to anybody. At least that was kind of my read on his character, especially because at this point in time, I believe Amy and Rory had just left him. Yeah. So he was dealing with that absence as well. So he's really kind of in a place in this story where he's like not wanting to make a lot of connections. So another important character we have is Rose Tyler. She is the companion for the 9th and 10th Doctors. So she was with Eccleston and Tennant. Rose is one of the few to become truly romantically entangled with one of the Doctors. So this version of Rose lives on an Earth where she married a human version of the 10th Doctor and had a child, Mia. And I have questions about that. We can get into that later. But that's what she's doing. She's looked into the heart of the TARDIS and is infused with time vortex energy, which allows her to occasionally see other timelines, which is kind of a big part of what happens in our story today. We also have Empress Rose. She is another alternate version of Rose Tyler, previously created from a temporal paradox due to an encounter with the 10th and 13th Doctors in the comic Alternating Current. So this version of Rose managed to survive the timeline rewrite and was dropped off on another conquered planet to keep fighting and liberate the populace from their oppressors the way she did on Earth, eventually forming an empire worth of followers and crowning herself as the Empress. So kind of like a freedom fighter, like a liberator, at least that's how she saw herself. And then finally we have Depow, who is this little purple dude working for Empress Rose and Rose's guard, and he's her second in command. His loyalty is really only as good as it keeps him in power, though, and the fighting continues without end because he kind of has an appetite for violence. So he also looks like he could have been in an episode of Dragon Ball Z because he has like the Saiyan armor, and he kind of looks like an alien like Goldo or something that would have fit there. So those are the main characters that you need to know about in our story today.
So our story today takes place following multiple storylines, and we kind of talked a little bit about that in the character section. But the first one picks up after the events of Doomsday, which is season 2 of the 2005 series, where Rose gets stuck in a parallel universe with the Meta-Crisis Doctor, who is fully human. He's not a Time Lord. He's a human version of the 10th Doctor. And she's also stuck there with her mother, Jackie, and her parallel universe father, Peter Tyler. So a lot of things going on there. In the comic, Rose can feel that someone is reaching out to her mind, so she reaches back and somehow is transported across time and space to London, naturally, because that's where the Doctor like always goes. And that's where she locates the TARDIS. However, inside the TARDIS is the 8th Doctor, who has never met Rose before. Meanwhile, the 11th Doctor is still thinking about the events of The Angels Take Manhattan from Season 7, where Amy and Rory have also been whisked away to a place where the TARDIS can't travel to, which is kind of interesting because that was the only way to get rid of Rose, and that was the only way to get rid of Amy and Rory, too, was to, I can't go there. But anyway, he lands on a desert planet where he is greeted by Depow, Empress Rose's second in command, who takes the 11th Doctor to the Imperial Palace, where the Empress has been having dreams about the real Rose and the human version of the 10th Doctor. So then the real Rose and the 8th Doctor trace a signal to the same planet and meet up, fortunately not causing, a paradox or imploding universe of their own. They kind of just walk out there and they're like, well, things didn't explode, so I guess it's all okay. The 11th Doctor takes the Empress away and shows her the worlds that she saved, where the cycle of oppression has continued because she didn't pay attention to what she was leaving behind when she left. However, while they're gone, the real Rose and the 8th Doctor try to make the Empire's army stand down, but Depow has learned to be strong and takes over instead, allying the Imperial army with the Sontarans. So the Sontarans just kind of show up, and they're like, Sontar ha! Sontar ha! And it's like, okay, great.
Yeah, that's their dialogue.
Yes, exactly. So the two doctors put their wibbly-wobbly, genius-y brains together, and they come up with a plan to breach the Imperial command ship and have the two Roses stand in close proximity to each other in the middle of the fleet, and they use the TARDIS to amplify their paradox energy, which sends the Sontarans back to their universe. Then, through the combined efforts of both TARDISes, they are able to return Rose to her parallel universe, and then they go their separate ways. So it kind of all wraps up neatly there at the end. That's pretty much, a synopsis of the story. So let's take a short break, and we'll be right back to discuss.
All right.
I remember I'm with my father. We're lying back in the grass. It's a warm Gallifreyan night.
Gallifreyan?
Gallifrey! Yes, this must be where I live. Now, where is that?
I've never heard of it.
The war between the Daleks and the Time Lords threatens all reality. You are the only hope left.
Make me a warrior now.
Dr. Elmore.
He was the Doctor who fought in the Time War, and that was the day he did it. The day I did it. The last day of the Time War. The war to end all wars.
So the melding of the paradox energies of the two roses in this story as sort of the plot device to get them out of the situation feels like the same way that they foreshadowed Don't Cross the Streams in Ghostbusters. They're like talking about how it would be a bad thing for like the whole story, and then that's the solution at the end, is to like, let's do the bad thing. So I don't know why that just like jogged my memory of that.
Or like at the end of Star Trek First Contact, where like they followed the Borg through time by being in their temporal wake, and then at the end they're like, well, I think I'm able to recreate, you know, how the Borg got here, and poof, back to their universe they go.
Yeah, it's like, that's very convenient for you that you can do that. All right.
Yeah.
So like, I had enough to be like, I can follow this story, but I think just the passage of time was like the main thing where I'm like, it's been so long since I've watched these episodes, because we're talking like middle and late 2000s, which for us millennials, it seems like that shouldn't have been that long ago, but it's been like 15 years or something. So yeah, it's been a long time.
Yeah, well, and Doctor Who continuity is a lot more fluid than what we're used to, because I actually have a quote here from Stephen Moffat, writer and later executive producer for Doctor Who. He said that a television series which embraces both the ideas of the parallel universes and the concept of changing time can't have a continuity error. It's impossible for Doctor Who to get it wrong, because we can just say he changed time. It's a time ripple from the Time War or whatever, and kind of explain it away. So it's like the worst version of, you know, like a DC or Marvel reboot where continuity is just, it's like it's kind of like New 52 and everything. It all exists. It's all true. It's all correct. There are no contradictions, because there's just different versions of the same thing going on out there, and it's all okay. So
it all exists is very much the state of the DC universe right now. So they decided to just go, you know, we're moving forward. We're not going to try and explain anymore. So, and then Paul McGann, I think I actually did some research on this, but I had the question after I read the story, but when I did the character bios, I realized, so he only showed up in that TV movie where I think Kylie Minogue was like supposed to be his companion, or something.
So,
but
that was nice.
Then he did a bunch of like radio serials afterwards, I guess. So he has played the character multiple times.
Right. Yeah. So he was in the 1996 TV film, which was supposed to be an attempt to relaunch the series following its cancellation in 1989, and it was heavily Americanized, and that worked for us, but you know, not for others, and it didn't do so well in ratings. And then we don't have anything from 96 until 2005 when the Ninth Doctor shows up, as far as TV goes. But yes, Paul McGann did star in more than 70 audio dramas and 73 novels that he has either read or the character is in. He also appeared in 2013. They brought him back in the mini episode The Night of the Doctor, which depicts the Eighth Doctor's final adventure and his regeneration into the War Doctor, played by John Hurt. So we did see that screen, but again, that was 2013, way after we had first, you know, seen him there. He also does get a brief cameo alongside other past incarnations, because they started doing this a lot with like the anniversaries. Well, they'll kind of like CGI in all of the Doctors up until that point to show that they're all working together. So in 2022, he had like kind of a cameo there, which would have been his first appearance for an actual like televised episode. So they've kind of brought him back more so, because I think fans are just kind of like, we like this version and we don't get to see him a lot. So
yeah, and what's the deal with him? It feels like kind of one of those untold chapters of the Doctor. So
right.
It's kind of cool that he's been able to explore the character, even though it wasn't necessarily on camera for most of it. That's pretty neat. My general opinion of him was that I liked him when I saw the movie. The movie did feel like it had definitely some more American sensibilities to it, which is fine with me as an American, but also Doctor Who always has a very specific kind of British flavor to it. So I can see why in the home country people would have been like, this is not what we're used to, or not what we're looking for, or whatever. So
and it was very 90s as well.
Yes,
so
it was
there's 90s. That kind of additional flavor as well.
Yeah. Yeah, he even has the like the part down the middle, kind of like hair combed out like this in the front. That kind of like classic '90s hairdo. Leo DiCaprio had that and all that. So, yeah. All right. Well, that's just kind of setting the table and making sure that I have all the continuity straight. But I guess the point you brought up is I don't have to necessarily. You can just go, oh well, a thing happened, and that's fine because it's Doctor Who.
Yeah, but it still enhances the reading when you have kind of like that backstory, like understanding why the 11th Doctor is like so just kind of cranky because of everything that he's been going through, and this whole thing about the Time War, which the 8th Doctor is completely clueless about. So they don't share that. Like when 11 and 10 get together, they kind of have this camaraderie because they're kind of similar in their jokey, quirky ways, but they also kind of like share that experience of the Time War, whereas the 8th Doctor is before that, so he's kind of like that chipper, person who's up at 6 a.m., drinks their coffee, and they're just happy to see you in the morning, and you're just like, I'm not ready for this. I think that's kind of like him rubbing him the wrong way because he was just so like positive and everything's great and the universe is wonderful, and like you haven't seen anything yet.
So yeah, there was some friction there, and it was all coming from the 11th Doctor. It was all coming from Matt Smith's character towards the 8th. And to the point that Rose had to break them up and be like, look, guys, we don't have time for you to like stay in here and fight with each other. But I actually wondered if the Doctor, like where the 11th Doctor was coming from, if it was because he just lost Amy and Rory and so he was in a bad mood, or if it was really because he knows that like the 8th Doctor is going to eventually be involved in the Time War. And he probably doesn't feel really great about a lot of the decisions and things that he had to do during that time in his life. So I almost wondered if there was some like regret there, and like seeing that old version of himself, he was like, oh, that guy sucks. Like, I'm so glad that I'm not that guy anymore.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. It kind of, it made me wonder if that was what they were going for.
I think a little bit of everything that you said. Like, yeah. I think it's all just kind of mixed together in this emotional pot. And so that's why he's like lashing out at him like that.
Yeah, but it is funny because they do get to a point in the story, and it's a very convenient explanation, but just go with it. Where, what does he say? The 8th Doctor is like, well, I probably won't remember any of this anyway because it's in a paradox. So at that point, Rose is like, oh, okay, cool. Let me tell you everything. So yeah, I was the bad wolf, and I've absorbed the heart of the TARDIS and done all this stuff, and that's who I am. And I guess to sort of get him to trust her a little bit more. But I was like, I'm glad that they came up with that because I needed that little bit of like refresher to keep going with the story because it had been so long for me. So
that's one thing I like that they do is like give us like a little refresher, a little hint of what happened without necessarily spending like a whole issue on flashbacks or anything like that, but just a little line of dialogue here or there, or explain to one character so that way you can kind of catch us up, or even if you're just like, I haven't seen this in so long that I remember it, but I need to connect the dots a little bit more. It helps. So I'm glad they did that.
Yeah, it was good. I think I didn't really mention this when we were talking about it earlier, but I think that one thing I would have liked to see more of was a little more internal conflict with the two Doctors. Maybe expand that out a little bit more. The 4 issues feel like a really brisk pace for this story, and I really felt the sort of pace of like, let's get to the next thing throughout it. Like, they did do enough to explain everything, and the story they're telling wasn't like super complicated, but I missed some of that character stuff that I felt like they could have maybe let breathe a little bit more, because I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, he resents his old self. Like, I would have liked to see a little bit more of that. And even Rose and her counterpart, they don't really interact with each other that much. As much as like Rose tries to replace her at one point and become the Empress while the other one's gone, but we don't really see them interact a whole lot. And I thought it would have been interesting to, I don't know, have them talk more about how their experiences are different and stuff. So
of course, none of that would have mattered if it all gets wiped out and they forget
it's
anyway.
True.
But
it's true. It's very true. Yeah. But just for our entertainment as an audience,
Well, a lot of times what they do with these kind of things is they're like, we want to put the 2 Doctors together and have an adventure, but we don't have a whole lot of time, even though it's about time travel. And we also don't want to have anything that's going to cause not necessarily a continuity error, but make things even more complicated than they are.
Right,
so that's why you
right.
get those convenient things of they just won't remember because it was a paradox. But also
Right.
that's why you get the kind of like rushed. You only get this story, we do the thing, and then we're gone. Like there's
Right.
not a lot of time for character development, because I think also there's so much material that you just get character development like overarching after reading different storylines and things like that. So I think it's really hard to pick something like this up if you just don't have familiarity, you haven't watched the show, you don't know how things work. I think you'd be completely lost if you pick something like this up, and there wouldn't be enough to give you something to be grounded. And if they did, it would take real estate away from actually telling more story and having those character moments. So it's a good thing they didn't take more time and kind of the Doctor is a Time Lord from the planet Gallifrey, start from the beginning.
Yeah, so they did have really short character bios on the very first page of every issue, and I did appreciate that, especially for illustrating the difference in the personality between the 8th Doctor and the 11th, because I didn't necessarily remember the 8th Doctor, how he was like personified exactly. But throughout the story, you do get that sense of like, wow, he's really just kind of like devil may care. Like, none of this is a big deal. We're going on an adventure. And he's kind of like, gung-ho Indiana Jones type character. Whereas the 11th one is more like, I've seen some stuff and like I've been through some stuff and you need to take things more seriously. And, so it was good to have, I think, that one play against him, as opposed to like Tennant, who is different performance-wise from Matt Smith, but I don't know that like the character himself is like exceptionally different. It's more a difference of like, this is how the actor is playing it.
Yeah,
it was than anything else. So
there was an anniversary special where Matt Smith and David Tennant's Doctors did team up, and they're hilarious together. Like,
I'm sure
just the
they
jokes
are.
and everything were great. So they're definitely a fun dynamic. But that's the thing, is like you have so many different actors that have played the Doctor that they've been doing these like team ups and crossovers since I think the 2nd and 3rd Doctors are the first ones to team up. So very early they started that kind of trend of, okay, every once in a while we got to have a meetup or a crossover or something going on.
Right.
So it's always fun to explore that, but usually it's like this, where it's like you come in, you have a story, something happens, it gets wrapped up neatly in a bow tie, and then you're done.
In a bow tie.
And then you're done.
Yeah, it did feel very tidy, and I think, I don't know if my expectation for a comic is that things won't wrap up as neatly, because usually comics are more serialized stories that just keep going and going and going. Yeah. But I was a little surprised at how everything just kind of reset to the status quo in this. I don't know, especially because I was excited to see the 8th Doctor again, because I was like, dude, we don't know much about this guy, so cool, like let's go on more adventures with him and stuff. And then it was kind of just over. But they did hit on some interesting ideas in this, and I think the biggest one, or like the best one, was kind of the idea of, so we've gone on all these travels to these different times and planets and stuff. Now let's go back to one that Rose has been to previously and see how they're getting along. And that part of the story was like, I was like, okay, now we're like getting into the good stuff, because it's kind of like how the Cerritos always does Second Contact on Star Trek Lower Decks. It's like they were now doing Second Contact with the species that supposedly she had liberated from like brutal overseers, but now the overseers were enslaved by the people that she liberated. So it was kind of like, did you make things better here, or did you just create like a different slave class on this planet? So
yeah, that I made that same connection with Lower Decks, and it's funny because like, it seemed like such a novel concept. Well, yeah, somebody should go back and follow up and see, did somebody boot up the giant computer and now it's back to issuing orders to the entire planet again? Like, did anyone go and check? That kind of thing.
Right.
But like when we first see Empress Rose, and like because of her name too, I was thinking, great, this is going to be like a mirror universe thing. She didn't have a goatee, because usually that's for the male characters. But like, on Star Trek where they have the mirror version has a goatee, and that's how you know they're evil.
They have to expose her midriff and like change her hairstyle.
Yeah,
and then that's what they'll do for the
like Colonel
characters.
Kira and all of that stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's where I thought we were going with this, and so I kind of like assumed that that's what it is, and so I got a little confused when I was reading it until I figured out that, oh no, actually she is doing good, she's just not very good at it. She's just kind of like she went in, she fixed something, and then something else happened, and now they're kind of back to where they started. So it was interesting because then all the doctor had to do was just show her, hey, you aren't making things as neat and tidy as you think. You almost need third contact and fourth contact, after first and second contact. Like, you got to keep checking up on this stuff so that it doesn't, just revert back, which is interesting because the doctor himself doesn't do that. Maybe because he fixes everything perfectly the first time around because he's a Time Lord and he just knows these things, or I don't know. But
well, you wonder about that because that opens up the story possibility of, wait, there are repercussions for your actions beyond what they show you in episodic TV. And so then you start to wonder, like, it's that thing about like the amount of information they give you in a TV show is usually sort of the realm that you ask questions in. So when you start to open up that cone a little bit, you start to go, wait a minute, why didn't we visit all these other time periods like the, oh, you my mummy, and all that stuff from different episodes? Why didn't we go back and see, like, did we improve things? Because I mean, again, I know I keep bringing up Star Trek, but like the example of the mirror universe is very pertinent because we find out on Deep Space Nine that yes, Kirk and Spock taught pacifism to the humans and Vulcans and like dismantled the Terran Empire in the mirror universe, but then other races came and conquered the humans. And so that basically was the result of their incursion over there. It's like they thought they were doing a good thing, but it actually ended up being much worse because now the Klingon-Cardassian alliance is, brutally ruling everybody, and you have what the intendant or whatever on the station over there. So yeah, I feel like that moment in the story, it made a lot of sense, and I like that they included it, but I was also surprised that changed Empress Rose's mind so quickly, because I feel like, at least the story gave me the impression that she's been doing this for a while. And she also has Depow, who was just somebody that she picked up on that planet, right? Yeah. And it seems like she trained him to be like this ruthless war general and everything, and like she had a whole army that she'd been issuing commands to and stuff. So if you're commanding an army, I would assume you have no illusions about the fact that like armies kill people. That's what they do. So to me, it was a little too perfect that he showed her like one instance of things going wrong, and then she was just like, oh yeah, well, I'm gonna stop my evil ways now. I was like, really? That's all it took? So I don't know, it just felt, and maybe that was a pacing issue, like maybe it was just because they needed to get to the end of the story, but I was expecting more of like a confrontation between Empress Rose and our Rose towards the end of the story, instead of them like cooperating to save the day. Yeah,
it seemed like Empress Rose was really the same as our Rose. It's just that she had lived a different time where she went and traveled to all these worlds to help them out, to be like the Doctor. So it's almost like, what if Rose got the chance to be like the Doctor and she went and did this, but then she kind of screwed up and needed a little bit of help, and then that really would have been the end, except Depow is like, no, we're not ending this. I came here to fight, and we're not going to not fight, so we're going to fight, and he forces the issue. If it wasn't for him, things would have just been like, all right, we're done, see you later, peace out. But because he invited the Centaurans, because now they had this threat to deal with, they had to actually, do something clever and come up with a way to, get them out of here so that they could dethrone Depow and put him, back on the sidelines so that he wasn't causing any more issues, which they did fairly quickly as well. But if it wasn't for that kind of escalation at the end, the story would have been a really quick, like, over and done.
Yeah, it would have. I don't know, I guess maybe I misread her character, because just the name Empress, the fact she's sitting on a throne, she has an army, she's like carrying a sword and all this stuff. I expected her to be a little more evil than she was, but like I said, it was just very much like she calls the Doctor there and he's like, what you're doing isn't so great, and she's like, you're right. and then that was kind of it.
Problem
so, I don't know.
solved.
That was a little bit disappointing to me.
Yeah.
I guess I just expected her to like push back, have a little more.
Well, and
conflict.
because of all this paradox stuff, right? So the doctors go back. They probably don't remember what happened. Does that mean that Empress Rose doesn't remember what happened either? Because that would be a shame.
I wondered about that. I wondered about that because I was like, is she gonna sit back down and be like, huh, those were some nice people. I'm sure glad they helped me. I wonder who they were. And then like go back to the same thing she was doing. Like, I don't know.
Wasn't I going to do
It seemed
something?
like they
I don't
needed
know.
to.
Let's go conquer
Yeah.
them. DePau, what are you doing there over there in the corner? Let's get over here and let's get the army
Yeah.
together. And yeah.
Well, I almost wondered if they should have left a doctor. Like, what the eighth doctor's not doing anything. Leave him there with her, and have him like maybe train her or something. It seems like the idea of the doctor meeting this version of Rose, going here, I'm gonna train you how to like help people in time and space, but then just leaving her was like a really bad idea. Because so like I feel like he's kind of partially responsible because maybe that's something that you need time to learn. I don't know.
But
I
even
know
so,
this is about
if they
time,
took a year to learn it and then it was still a paradox, then would it
Yeah.
still have counted? I don't know. But
the paradox aspect of this is very confusing.
yeah. Well, and two, like the whole thing about the doctor, like he basically he ditches people, like that's
Sure.
he does that. And
Yeah,
we've
that's very
we've
true.
seen that, like so one of the companions he basically dumps is Sarah Jane Smith, and she comes back during Tennant's era and is basically just like, you know, tries to understand, like, we were doing great and we were traveling and we were solving all this stuff, and then you just left me and then didn't come back. And so
Right.
she had to, you know, go back to her regular life and try to acclimate again, you know, over decades until she spotted the TARDIS and she's like, oh my gosh, he's here. And what
Right.
that, you know, had to give him a piece of her mind. So
Did that one? I remember an episode where there was like a robot dog. Is that the character?
on the metal dog, yeah, K9,
Yeah.
K9.
Okay.
He was in the original series, I guess you could call it.
Okay.
Yeah, he was the Doctor's companion, a little robot dog, and so Sarah Jane has him, but he doesn't work, and so
Okay.
yeah, they end up fixing.
Yeah,
him.
you just like jogged my memory. I was like, I think I've seen that episode. Okay.
Because they're like, stay in the car with the dog. They tell that to Mickey, and Mickey's just like,
Oh, Mickey.
I am the metal dog. Like, he's the sidekick who just has to sit around and wait for the heroes to do the work. So that was
Right.
funny. But yeah, she's basically, that's, I think, when she asks him, like, you know, why did you just leave me, is when he's trying to fix the dog. Like, so they actually deal with
So
it in that
that-
instance. But
That is, I guess they have dealt with that within the show. The more I think about it, that's pretty much a character trait of every iteration, isn't it? That he gets sort of attached to somebody and then he's like, I don't know if I'm comfortable with that. And then he'll just like be like, well, onwards and upwards. We're going to go on either with somebody else or just go it alone for a while. He always says he's going to go it alone.
yeah.
And then inevitably another companion shows up that
Well, so then
he
with
ends up
the
having adventures with,
2005 series, so you have Rose, who basically is trapped in an alternate, you know, reality, and then we have Donna, but then he has to
Right.
wipe every trace of knowledge of him or time travel or anything from her mind, because if she remembers it, her mind is going to basically poof out because of what, you know, happened with that meta crisis. So she can't remember anything, so they have to wipe her memory, so then he has to stay away from her. And then, you know, when we have Amy and Rory, like, they get transported to basically this time in New York where the, like, what was it? There was so much time travel it kind of like burned the. I think it was like kind of like Star Trek, where they're like, oh, if you go too fast, you're going to burn up the universe or whatever. It was that kind of thing where, like, he tried to land and the TARDIS literally like just bounced off the city. So so they did try to find ways to get the companions off the show without him ditching them,
without him being a jerk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they did try to find ways, because that was a theme, it seemed like, for a while, where somebody just wasn't back on the show, and you're like, well, where did they go? Well, I guess he just ditched them.
Yeah. Yeah, so the art is definitely the thing that we haven't really talked about a whole lot yet. And really, the thing that jumped out to me most was that there is a completely detailed on model original series Star Trek communicator that Empress Rose throws on the ground. And if you can see in Joe's camera there, like it's perfectly just that's what they look like on TOS. So I thought that was very funny. And that was the main thing that jumped out to me about the art. Other than that, I don't know. Rose feels like she's off model a little bit in some of the drawings. And I'm not sure what it is. I think part of it is Billie Piper has very big lips. And I don't know that they were drawing, that the artist was exactly drawing that. And so there were panels, there were a couple where I was like, man, that like really looks like Billie Piper. But there are a lot of them where it's like, this just kind of looks like a generic blonde lady. So it's, again, the whole conversation that we've had before about like, you want to be doing what you can to capture the likeness of the actor or actress, but you also don't want to look like you're copying frames from a TV show. So it didn't look like copying, but there were times where I was looking at it and I was like, if I didn't know that was Rose, I wouldn't know that.
And like, so like here, you got two panels that are back to back.
Sure.
She looks different in both, and she looks like she has a really huge shoulder.
Right.
It just kind of seemed like very inconsistent. And like there's one where she's, I don't know, angling her head a certain way and her chin is like huge.
And her mouth is like completely straight. I think
there it is. I found it.
Yeah. So that one is really goofy looking, very cartoony. So it's again, it's that challenge that we always talk about you're translating something from live action to comic book form, and how comic booky or how cartoony do you get with it? And if it's cartoony for like the whole way through, then maybe that's fine because the characters are on model within the story. But like Paul McGann and Matt Smith pretty much always look like themselves in the panels. So I think that makes it more noticeable when you look at Rose and you're like, she doesn't quite look right. So
yeah, it just seemed kind of inconsistent to me where, like you said, you'd see one panel and you're like, oh, this really looks like Billie Piper. You're like, okay, great. And then right after that, like, whoa, this is weird. It was just kind of strange because it's like, okay, just pick one. Are you going to do the off-model version or are you going to do the Billie Piper version? I don't care which one. Just pick one and stick with it.
Just pick one so it's consistent the whole way through. Yeah. So that was a little bit distracting during the story, but it wasn't really enough to seriously affect my enjoyment of it. I don't think.
You still knew it was Rose. It wasn't somebody else. So it's not like, from far away their expressions were just invisible and you couldn't tell who was who. So
and because Rose has kind of a superhero-y outfit on with like a purple cape and like Saiyan shoulder pads and all that kind of stuff.
Empress Rose,
Empress Rose, sorry. You can always pick her out from the other one. Because even when our Rose Tyler decides to impersonate the Empress, she's just wearing this kind of like purple sheer dress. And so that, again, still they were able to distinguish.
Even when you're not sure.
Oh, yeah, there's the
Empress
big scar.
Rose has that big scar on her face. So that makes it easier. Because they do swap, well, not swap clothing, but Rose dresses up as Empress Rose to kind of show the illusion that things are still... they go to cancel sending the army, and that's what makes Depow take over, because in the same time, the Doctor's showing Empress Rose, hey, this is what went wrong. Our Rose has dressed up as Empress Rose and is trying to stop the coup now.
So I kind of felt like that section... So she seems to be trying to like appeal to their better nature and all this stuff and be like, hey guys, like we don't have to fight and all this stuff. And I feel like she should have tried to lean into the part a little bit more and maybe try to be a little more like the other one. I mean, I know they weren't with her long, but they like immediately knew that something was up, or at least Depow did. He immediately was like, that's not you, you know, and then he's like, let's have a coup. So then of course it splits the army down the middle, and like some of them are loyal to who they think is the Empress, and then there's some that are loyal to Depow. And so then we've got that whole, like, I don't know, like Civil War type thing going on. But then Depow wouldn't have been able to pull anything off except the Santarans. That's what he was able to bring in that was really the game changer. So crossing the streams at the end was what allowed them to send the Santarans back to their own time. I don't know if we ever get explained how DePau even acquired them, because that felt like a little bit of a plot hole to me, where I was like, well, if they're coming from some different time or dimension or something, like, how did he acquire that technology, or how did he access them?
I can't remember, because it's at the end when the two doctors are putting their heads together and they're trying to figure out how to solve it. There's something about how they hopped a ride through the paradox energy or something. That because we have the two roses in proximity, there was enough. There was like a signal or something that's what led the doctors here, and the Santarans found it as well. So they piggybacked on it and hitched a ride, and that's why the two roses generating more paradox energy was able to send them away, because it was the same thing that I guess they followed to get here.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
Wibbly wobbly, timey-wimey.
That makes as much sense as anything makes sense in Doctor Who. I mean,
exactly.
So that's fine. This is one of those sci-fi franchises where I always have to recalibrate myself a little bit going into it, because I know that they are a lot more fast and loose with their rules, and their universe isn't set in, I mean, when I watch Star Trek, there are certain things that I expect, like it needs to be grounded. I shouldn't be seeing things like, I don't know, magic groups of Romulans that stand around and chant and have a bias against AI from another dimension. That's something that would be really weird in Star Trek. But I always remember, like, okay, Doctor Who is dealing with, like, they want to do their time travel adventure stories, but they're not as concerned with those little details. So I always have to kind of like remind myself, don't get caught up in that kind of stuff, because I tend to do that. I tend to want to, as a consumer, be like, but how did this happen? How did that happen? What are the intricacies of this technology? And it's like, that's not what this franchise is about. All right. So
I think that's really all I've got for this one. If you're ready to move to final thoughts.
I don't have anything else to talk about.
Comics.
All right, well, welcome back, everybody. I think we're ready for final thoughts. I'm going to go ahead and go first. So we talked about it a lot. I wanted to give it like a 3.5 from my initial read of it, because I was like, this was pretty good. It was pretty enjoyable story. The more we talked about it, I actually think that my expectations and just things that I felt like were good ideas that they could have and should have expanded on, I really would have liked to push it out to at least 5 issues and have a little bit more depth, especially with the two battling doctor ideologies and just seeing the differences between them. I think that would have been fun to explore more. And also, maybe it takes more than one iteration of a bad planet to get Rose to, heel turn, where she becomes like, oh, I'm just a good guy now. Because that just really felt rushed to me. So I think I'm going to give it a 3, which is just an indicator of, like, this is a perfectly fine comic book story. I do have some issues with it that I think could have been addressed if they'd spent more time with the characters and maybe fleshed out the story a little bit more. The pacing was just a little bit too fast for me, and I wanted I thought that the ideas at play were good, but I wanted them to be explored more than they were. So 3 out of 5 for me.
I think if we would have taken, another issue or two to kind of maybe actually have Empress Rose need some convincing or, something to de-escalate the situation there, instead of her just kind of rolling along with it.
Or even give us more of a sample of who she is as a character prior to meeting these other characters in the story. Because we kind of meet her as she's dreaming about our Rose, and we don't really get any kind of a baseline for, like, what is she like before we're trying to flip her. And so I would care more about her changing her perspective if I knew what her perspective was going into that, So
and that might just be because we haven't read Alternating Current where she was introduced.
That's fair. Yeah,
so
that's fair.
My assumption is that this is picking up from an older story thread.
Okay.
We see all of that stuff for the character, and then at the end she's sitting there like some line of dialogue to be continued, and then we pick it up in this story. That's kind of how
You know-
I'm assuming it went down.
You know how I bet it ends? I bet she's sitting on the throne, and as the camera pulls back, she goes, "You keep what you kill." And then
And then Riddick offline 30
yeah,
years.
exactly.
Well, not that long, but it seems like
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, so I think maybe that's what's hurting our
Okay.
kind of enjoyment of this. And that's always the problem with something
Right.
like this, where everything is continuity, because some things may not, some things may be, and it doesn't necessarily matter in the end because it's all, for fun. But
Sure.
if they pick up a story thread from somewhere, you have to really rack your brain of, okay, where is this from? Where have I heard this? Where have I seen this? And that's what makes it hard to do serialized stories, especially like what Marvel was doing a couple of years ago, even now, is with the shows kind of referencing each other and talking about things that happened here and there, and you have to kind of know what's been going on in all these different things to be able to
Right.
keep up with it. It makes it harder to appreciate, what they did with it. So this may very well have not felt rushed to somebody who knew about this character before, but
Sure.
it still seemed like it was wrapped up pretty quickly either way. That, it really didn't take anything and maybe that's because she really is like our Rose and it's really no big deal. She just kind of
Sure.
got a little off course and just needed a little bit of correction. But
Mm-hmm.
I kind of wish that, like, for an event like this, we just take a little bit more time to, we don't have to feature all the characters on the page all at once, and they did a good job of kind of breaking up the 8th and 11th Doctors for them to kind of go off on their own a little bit. So I feel like you could have expanded the story somewhat. So
Yeah.
but I'm going to say the same thing. Like, it's not that I didn't enjoy it and that I didn't like it. It's kind of like one of those side quests in a game that has like a lot of quests, and you do it and you
Yeah.
rescue the thing and you get the reward and whatever, and you just kind of go on. Like,
You're like, yeah, that was fine.
that was fun, right? But it was just like this little side adventure that, it's just a story light. And
Wow.
that's kind of all there is to it. So I would say a 3 out of 5 is the score I would give it as well, just because it's kind of like, it's in the middle. It's not exceptional. It doesn't do anything, for Doctor Who at large. It doesn't really give you a whole lot about, Empress Rose or anything, but it's an enjoyable story. I mean,
Sure.
there was enough there that it's like, it made sense for the most part. And, you get to see these two doctors interact, and you get to see Rose again, and then they go their separate ways. So it's, kind of in the middle of the road, I think. Maybe.
Yeah, that's definitely how I felt about it. It was good to see Paul McGann for sure. I mean, I had only seen that TV movie that they did from '96, but I remember thinking, like, he doesn't seem like a bad fit for the character, and like, so it was cool for me to find out just through my research that he didn't have to stop there. At least he did have other performances to do, even if they were audio only.
Yeah. Well, and if we have a little bit of time left, we can talk a little bit about the Time War, because this,
Okay.
we kind of alluded to it a little bit, that this thing ends up happening. So when the 8th Doctor returns on screen,
Sure.
we see that he is a conscientious objector to this war that's going on between the Time Lords and the Daleks. So he's trying to save a woman from a spaceship crashing towards the planet Karn, but the person actually refuses his aid because he's a Time Lord, and she believes, all Time Lords are just as destructive as the Daleks, so I don't want to have anything to do with them.
Okay.
So then the 8th Doctor ends up being essentially killed in the crash, but he's temporarily restored to life by the Sisterhood of Karn, which is kind of like the witches in the Star Wars universe almost.
Oh, okay.
But basically, they convince him that for the sake of the universe, he's going to have to fight. He can't just use his sonic screwdriver and wave this one away. He's actually going to have to have a persona where he is fighting. So that's kind of where we take this detour, where we have the War Doctor, who doesn't get a main number. Like, he's not the 8th and a half Doctor. He's not the 9th Doctor. He's just the War Doctor, because he's like kind of a different version that actually does use weapons and does fight, whereas all the other Doctors, they won't use a gun, they won't use a weapon or anything like that. So basically, there's this like giant war that's going on, and so he kind of his hand gets forced that he's going to have to do something about this war that's
Right.
raging on. But what ends up happening is basically all the cracks that you see throughout the 10th Doctor's run, where he's in Amy's house as a kid and there's like a crack on the wall. And then we see like an episode after episode that crack keeps following him.
Yeah, I remember that. Mhm.
So basically what happens is the Daleks and the Time Lords get frozen in time and removed from the universe. So they basically like get annihilated, but at the last second, the whole planet Gallifrey is whisked away to a pocket universe where it's hidden away. And so the 9th Doctor, the 10th Doctor, and up until this point, the 11th Doctor were under the impression that Gallifrey was gone and that he
Right.
killed them.
Yeah.
So I said earlier the cracks that were seen throughout the 10th Doctor's run. I don't know why I said that. It's the 11th.
Yeah, the 11th.
Doctor's-
It's
so-
the 11th. Yeah. Yeah, because that was a huge part of the Matt Smith overarching storyline.
Yes. So
that-
we
that I
find out
remember.
at the end of his storyline that those cracks were basically from the Time Lords hiding in the pocket universe looking for a way out. And so to know that if they're going somewhere safe, because they don't want to just appear out in the universe and then get attacked again, they want to
Right.
know, they want to establish contact with the Doctor. So the way that they do that is by broadcasting a question, Doctor Who? And so
Right.
in order to prove that he is who he says he is, he has to utter his Gallifreyan name. And
Right.
that's what allows him to establish contact with them. So that's kind of like, in a nutshell, the whole, Time War thing. And then
Okay.
like Gallifrey is actually like gone and everybody thinks that the Time Lords are all dead and that he's the last of
Right.
the Time Lords. And it's really ironic because Gallifrey's reestablished, the Time Lords are back, and then all the Time Lords except for the Doctor are finally wiped out by the Spy Master in an episode called Spyfall. So play on words
Wow.
with Skyfall. But they end up getting ripped out or wiped out anyway.
Oh, you're in trouble.
Exactly. So,
Okay.
Yeah, Doctor Who's got all kinds of crazy.
And so at what
stuff
point
going
did the War Doctor then board the Nostromo and get an alien parasite laid in him? Because I saw that movie
on.
and that was confusing. And he
That
looked
was-
way younger too.
Yeah. Well, and he had synthetic material for blood too.
Yes, he did. No, that's Bilbo Baggins.
Oh,
See,
that's right.
yeah, that's Bilbo Baggins. That
Bilbo
was the
had-
android. So John Hurt was Kane.
That's right, yeah,
in the
yeah.
original Alien, and of course he's also President William Sadler or Sutler in
England
V for
prevails.
Vendetta. V for Vendetta. Yeah, he's a great actor. It was really cool to see him when he showed up on Doctor Who. I was like, man, he'd be a great doctor. And then it was like, well, but he's also probably out of their pay grade. So they used him for like one episode, and then you don't really see him after
He's
that.
a temporary doctor that you get
Yeah.
to see in a TV movie. Yeah, and then
Right.
that's kind of the
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
But it
think
was still
Rose
cool.
showed up in that too, as well. if I
Yeah, so
recall.
it's not actually Rose. It's there's this device that chooses an image which is weird because he doesn't recognize her, so he doesn't know who this is. But
Right.
it chooses an image from his timeline. So it picks one
Okay.
from the future. So it's kind of like, a device that would read your mind or like the prophets in Deep Space Nine, where they
Sure.
always show up as somebody that you've seen before so that way they can
Right.
reuse those actors. Well, that's kind of what happened here, except that this person was from this character's future. So he
Yeah.
was like, I don't know who you are, and they're like, well, I chose this image because it, exists on your timeline. And he's like, okay, cool. So they got Billie Piper, but it was not Rose.
Yeah. Well, I do think it's fun. It sort of steering it back to the comic book. I do think it's fun to see these characters that we haven't seen in a while, even though Billy may not look like Billy quite as much. It's still cool to have another story with Rose Tyler and
Yeah.
sort of explore where she goes from there. So, yeah, I'm not mad that I read it or anything. It was just kind of average, I guess, was overall my impression of it. So.
All right. Well, that's a wrap on our review. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode of We Like Comics because they have no bones. Make sure you rate us on your podcast platform of choice and also comment, like, and subscribe on YouTube. And be sure to check out our after shows where the discussion continues. But not this time because we already did a Doctor Who episode or after show. So
That's
we
right.
need to have another one.
Yeah, and I guess our Time War explanation here could kind of service.
Yeah, sure.
Something close to what an after show would be anyway. So don't forget to tell us what you think of this comic by posting on social media at Boneless Comics Podcast or on X at Boneless Comics 1 using the hashtag Boneless Comics Podcast for all your questions and comments. It's hard to say Boneless Comics Podcast that many times in a row. Say that 5 times fast.
Boneless Comics Podcast. Boneless Comics Podcast. Boneless Comics Podcast. Boneless
Boneless
Podcast. Who let the dogs out? Boneless Comics Podcast.
So next episode, the next episode, I don't think there will be dogs, but we will discuss Volume 1 of the all-new fantasy series Edenwood, which is written and penciled by Tony S. Daniel and published in 2023 by Image Comics.
All right. Well, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you later.
All right.
Green light,
Comics, 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 comics,
green light,
comics, comics.
because they have no balls.
You just flashy thing me?
Get that flashy thing out of my face.